MTV Unplugged, an occasional network series that showcases major musicians and bands in a stripped-down acoustic set with high-value presentation and production. Often, the performances were iconic and live albums were made from the recordings, some of which are still cherished to this day. Starting in 1989, running strong for over 10 years and then brought up sporadically through the years with TV and online performances, including during the last few years, MTV made something special with their soundstage setting for many years, and it was a huge deal to see. While MTV does not promote or produce Unplugged nearly as much as the network used to, I think it's important to bring up just how huge these events were when they happened, and I'm going to take a look at what I think are the top 10 best MTV Unplugged performances. Rules for the list. Number 1, I'm only including a band or artist if they fall under the umbrella of rock, alternative, indie, grunge, metal, etc. Those are the genres this channel covers, and that's what I'm sticking with to help narrow things down a bit. And number 2, I'm not only including how good the music performed is, but also the significance of the performance. That'll make sense as the list goes on because rarely was an Unplugged show just a band playing acoustic. That's really it. You know how these videos work. Let's get to it. Number 10. Starting off with a controversial pick because controversy was always in Oasis. Back in 1996, the Unplugged session was scheduled, but Liam couldn't perform due to a bad throat, or he claimed as such. Noel took the charge and knocked it out of the park, much to Liam's chagrin as he watched his brother steal the show. Regardless, Oasis had a wonderful performance and fit perfectly for the Unplugged recording. Oasis was massive at the time in the mid-90s, and no matter how much personal drama and bratty brother behavior was going on, the music still came through, and this Unplugged recording was no different. The fact that they were missing a brother on stage and that made less tension on that night might have helped a little bit, which is awful to say, but yeah, the Gallagher brothers hated each other, so it makes sense. So Noel singing many of the songs he helped write and singing them in his own way made the performance that much more important. One less Gallagher, but just as amazing of a night for Oasis, who were already on top of the world. Number 9. The most recent entry on this list comes back from 2017, airing in 2018, with Biffy Clyro, who are a massive name in Europe and still getting steam in the US. This MTV UK-produced Unplugged session took the rock band to a beautifully peaceful performance with a much larger audience than many Unplugged sessions have had, and proved why an acoustic Biffy Clyro album should exist. That larger audience also made the performance more of a moment, with many people singing along, not screaming, but just singing happily along peacefully. Along with the band, the cellists and the added strings made so many of Biffy Clyro's the classy, inspirational, breathtaking musical moments. This is an MTV Unplugged session that does not get nearly the recognition it deserves, as Biffy Clyro and the Roundhouse venue audience had magic that night with what they made, with everyone putting in such great effort. From Simon Neil's great delivery to the set list that had everyone in a great mood, with some surprises along the way, Biffy Clyro proved they should get way more respect when all things are said and done. Number 8. Stone Temple Pilots for sure had a wild ride with Scott Weiland, and the band found their way to stand out big in the 90s. When Stone Temple Pilots was invited to an Unplugged session after their huge debut tour, Scott and company made the setting feel as homey as possible, including a performance in a rocking chair. As laid back as it gets. Even though this was an Unplugged session, Stone Temple Pilots added more to the stage with big percussion to fill out the sound, and it worked great. This was proof you can take a big sounding band with a lot of energy and emotion, apply it to an Unplugged moniker, and still sound massive. STP made it into MTV with a game plan and made it special. Stone Temple Pilots also used this big TV spot to perform the new song Big Empty before its release on the following album. This Unplugged session was as well performed as it was the perfect marketing tool for the band to get people excited for Purple. The band showed a different style of them, and they were also able to make sure they were a name worth paying attention to. Number 7. By 2012, Florence and the Machine had become a huge deal, all bolstered by the angelic and dynamic voice of Florence Welch. From indie roots to big stage spectacle, Florence and the Machine have done it all. The Unplugged stage decoration with gorgeous lights and accompanied with a small orchestra and choir made the entire session that much more memorable. Not only do special guests like Josh Homme make great moments, but this Unplugged session proves some of the biggest songs off ceremonials could be taken to an intimate acoustic sound and still leave a huge impact. As As good as everyone is on stage, it's obviously Florence that proves she is leagues ahead of other singers. This unplugged recording was done by MTV UK and was later released as an album that is worth seeking out because the production is not only top-notch, but it's another side of many songs that made Florence and the Machine a big deal. This is an unplugged session that isn't well known in the States, and that should be fixed as it's 10 years old now, but hasn't aged a day through the sound. Number 6. Reunions are a big deal for famous bands, but they don't always end up the way people hoped, as many Led Zeppelin fans have experienced previously. That's when Robert Plant and Jimmy Page pulled out all the stops for something special, a 90-minute performance recorded over several sessions, including musicians from the London Metropolitan Orchestra and Egyptian Orchestra. This was a bit out of the comfort zone for 2 of the 3 living members at the time for Zeppelin, but it was still a big deal, and it worked. The unplugged session worked so well that it was later released as No Quarter, the unleaded acoustic release, getting several songs on radio airplay decades after Led Zeppelin's heyday, and the acoustic album hitting number 4 on Billboard 200. It was a wildly new take on Led Zeppelin, both big songs and deep cuts. You knew it was a big deal just minutes into the performance. Page and Plant made this a spectacle worth remembering, and even if the ideal Led Zeppelin reunion under that Led Zeppelin name would never really truly come into fruition in the perfect form, this unplugged session was a beast of its own and worth remembering. Number 5. When Kiss went back to New York in 1995, it wasn't just for the unplugged session, it was for a true reunion. Not only was Kiss seen in a totally different light and heard with a stripped-down sound, but this recording was also the first time the original lineup for Kiss was together since 1979. It was a performance with past and current Kiss members. Kiss knocked it out of the park. While the no-makeup era of Kiss is not fondly remembered, this was a setting where it was perfectly fitting. It was the original lineup plus Kulick and Singer, which had never been done before. It was a massive deal for old Kiss fans and MTV as ratings were through the roof. The performance was great, it had energy while being acoustic, and there was such a lively presence for the band who was known for anything but this style or presentation. The Unplugged session was released as an album the following year, and for good reason, as this led to a true reunion tour with the original lineup. Great Unplugged session that reunited Kiss, and they're still a blast to see and hear. Back then, and believe it or not, Kiss are still around. Weird and crazy to think that. Number 4. I don't know of another band in the early 90s to have hit the grunge scene harder and more perfectly than Pearl Jam right out of the gate. That meteoric shot into the world of music and upfront on MTV could only lead to a performance on Unplugged. With fewer than 50 people in the audience, Pearl Jam proved why they were the real deal. I would have loved to be in that small audience for something that special. Eddie Vedder was lost in the performance and giving it his all. This was at a time where the Unplugged sessions were becoming known as a big deal, and Pearl Jam ramped it up even more. Pearl Jam became a phenomenon, and seeing this on MTV sealed the deal. A 7-song set including big hits from 10 and a future movie soundtrack song. Pearl Jam put an exclamation mark on what alternative and grunge could be with such emotion and range. It's hard not to get pulled into the studio when watching this and wishing you could be there seeing it in person. Pearl Jam had lightning in a bottle, and this was that bottle on display. Number 3. While Eric Clapton may not have the same mindset and attitude he had 30 years ago, that does not change how massive of a success his Unplugged session and album was in 1992. This had many big songs from Clapton's history rearranged, made acoustic, and whether lovely or saddening to hear, this was Clapton at his purest form in music ability. Cover songs, the reworkings of famous tracks like Layla, and the heartbreaking performance of Tears in Heaven less than a year after Clapton's son passed, MTV Unplugged was much more than the music that night, but reliving the highs and lows of a musician's life, proving he was as human as he was talented. Once the live album from the Unplugged session was released, it would go on to win several big Grammys and become one of the best-selling live albums of all time. It was raw emotion at points, and I don't think even MTV knew how big of a deal this night would be for Clapton and the network itself, as it still stands out 30 years later. Before we get to the final 2, please hit the like button below if you've been enjoying this video so far. It helps the video and channel out a ton. Thank you. Also, for the final 2, this is probably as close to a tie as I've ever done with ranked videos. So even though I do have them listed as number 2 and number 1, they are virtually as highly regarded as possible. So I get if one person thinks that one is better than the other. For me, I can't really rank them higher than the other, and I'm just having them as number 2 and number 1 for the sake of this list. Number 2. 1996, years after Alice in Chains made it big. This was a time when the future of Alice in Chains was in complete question for countless reasons. It was nothing short of a miracle that the band was able to get together in New York, walk out on stage after not playing together live for several years, and make some of the best live music ever recorded from a band. It's a beautiful closing visual for that era of Alice in Chains that should never had to close out on that chapter the way they did. From the opening minute with the guitar riff of Nutshell being played to applause, and more applause coming in as Lane takes the stage, this entire session was such a memorable spectacle that fans still see it as an all-time MTV highlight. This unplugged performance was truly proof of how talented everyone was in the band to play seamlessly together for the first time in front of an audience and be recorded. This was one of the last performances of Lane with Alice in Chains, and my words do not do justice of how memorable the scene and music are. Of the many memories Lane left us, the unplugged session truly stands out. Number 1. I feel it's safe to claim that Nirvana is arguably the most synonymous band when talking about MTV Unplugged performances, and for good reason. This was Nirvana years into their groove and proving how effortlessly talented they were, even when stripped down and without a crowd of intense fans. This was grunge in a quiet form that resonated with everyone. And what's great about this unplugged session is that it was not Nirvana playing the hits. They made a unique set list of deep cuts and cover songs that would become famous shortly after. Kurt & Company designed everything from the set list to stage design, which only made the session stand out more. The Unplugged album would go on to be legendary, with songs still getting alternative and 90s station airplay to this day. Nirvana wanted to make something special and left a high bar to measure up against for all other unplugged sessions. Nirvana's Unplugged was recorded just a few months before Cobain's passing, and the live album was released after his death. This was one of the last performances and memories Kurt left us, and it's still cherished for how perfect of a time capsule album and performance this was. Everything I'm saying doesn't do it justice. Watch it in full online and see Nirvana in a different form. And that was a look at the top 10 best MTV Unplugged sessions. Which Unplugged performance do you think was the best? There have been many of them out there, so leave a comment and let everyone know. Big thanks to my patrons and special thanks to Chris Doman and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos, get weekly new music playlists, and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon. Click the link in the video description for more info. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified on upcoming videos, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. For a bonus question for the people who wait till the end, who do you think would do a great unplugged session now? I'm curious to see what people suggest.